Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is Seth,
This is Ariana.
and this is the Pop Cult Podcast. This is the final episode of the Pop Cult Podcast ever for 2024. We won't make any more episodes for 2024 after this one, right? Because it'll be 2025 next. So because it is the last episode of the year, we are doing our top favorites episode. A little later, we're going to be talking about our top 5 favorite films, but first, we're just going to start with our top 5 favorite media things. So these aren't things that had to have been new in 2024. They were just new to us in 2024.
Yeah.
And some of them were new in 2024. It's just something that stood out. And it could be any kind of piece of media, a book, a TV show, a comic, a video game, anything that isn't a film, but is media. So, Ariana, I'm going to let you start. What is your number 5 favorite media thing from 2024?
All right. I'm going to start off with the show Platonic
Okay.
that features Seth Rogen and Brim Rose. Is that her name? Or is like
Do you think that's someone's name? Yeah, Brim Rose. You think that's a person's name? You mean Rose Byrne?
Yes, Rose
Okay,
Byrne.
I was like Brim Rose.
Wow.
Well, I mean, this is the lady who coined the term Borf when trying to talk about the Klingon crew member of the Enterprise and Next Generation. So Brim Rose, your favorite actress.
Yeah.
So tell me about Platonic. Why do you like it? Why is it your favorite show that you've put on this list?
I liked it because it was one of the rare times that show was actually had me laughing out loud a few times. It's a show that basically is two best friends that have not been in contact with each other over 10 years finally get in contact when Rose's character realizes that Seth Rogen's character is going through a divorce. The reason that she had dropped having contact with him was she had told him that she didn't think it was a good marriage, that she didn't like the bride to be. And so he was so in love at the time, he cut her off only for them to realize she might have been right. Two friends are kind of like going through a crossroads in their lives. Seth Rogen's character, along with going through the divorce, is also having complications through his brewery because, the people that also own the brewery with him want it to be successful and make a bunch of money, but he's focused more on trying to make like quality brews. And Rose's character's like last kid that was like at home is finally going to school, showing independence. And
It's like, how old are the kids?
Her one kid's supposed to be 5.
Okay, so they're not like going to university.
No.
It's just they're going to school in general. Gotcha.
Yeah, and so after she'd sacrificed, after having been a lawyer beforehand, she's like wondering should she go back to being a lawyer or something else. And the two of them push each other in different ways, either it being like having fun, getting high, or experimenting with drugs, only to realize like they might also be the ruin of each other. So it's
Now the show is called Platonic.
Yes.
One of my reasons I think I didn't want to watch the show was I thought, oh, if that's going to be the title of the show, is this going to be a show that's a will they, won't they show?
No, they never do.
Okay.
Like, her husband, like, at some point thinks that they are, but it's because she ended up, like, not being honest that she had taken, like, what's that drug that Elon Musk is all over?
Ketamine?
That she had taken ketamine because she thought she was taking cocaine, and he was like, how is that better?
Yeah.
She's like, I'm taking cocaine. I know what to do in cocaine. I did not know to do with ketamine. And how it is at the least like when he has the suspicions, it's kind of like short-lived, and he understands like, okay, they just have this relationship that they're able to explore these things that I don't realize that like I think, oh, it's fun, but she's then going on me like, but that's so fucked up, right? Like, I'm a mom. I shouldn't be getting high and breaking wine bottles at a convenience store because I took a drug I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the least like Seth Rogen is appropriate for his age at times, at realizing like he shouldn't be living the life that he's living. Briefly in the show, he dates a 25-year-old, and Rose's character is telling him like, I don't think this is a good fit for you. He ignores her only to be like, oh my God, this is a fucking child,
Mhm.
and proceeds to break up with her on her birthday. So yeah, that's platonic.
All right, well, my TV show on my list of 5 favorite things is Ripley, the miniseries that was on Netflix with Andrew Scott. I believe that's his name, right?
Yes.
Okay. I figure you would know that. I feel like he's probably a face claim in some of the role play stuff that you do.
You get my hobbies out of this.
This is the whole podcast is about a hobby. What are you talking about? So yeah, based on The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, I had seen the original 99 film. Or actually, that was not the very first one. There was one even further back in the 60s that has a different title. I can't remember what it is. But I think this is my favorite adaptation of this story because of two things. Andrew Scott and Steve Zalazan, the writer-director.
Yes.
Now, Steve Zalazan made another miniseries on HBO that I have not seen, and after watching this, I need to see it, The Night Of,
Okay.
which I think has some connection to the podcast Serial. I don't know.
All right.
But he was mainly a screenwriter, and he's written scripts like Awakenings, which we mentioned last week, about Robin Williams, Robert De Niro.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Schindler's List, he wrote the script for. The Gangs of New York,
Yes.
The Irishman.
Yes.
He's written a lot of really good movies. And he uh, is the mind behind this adaptation of Ripley.
Yeah.
So some of the things I really liked about it was I loved the choice to shoot it in black and white because it's set in Italy during that time period of, Fellini and De Sica and all those Italian kind of films. So it kind of helps you get that vibe by shooting it in that way. And it's also some of the most gorgeous, like, black and white cinematography I've seen in a very long time.
Yeah.
And I also really loved Andrew Scott's take on Tom Ripley because you have not seen the 99
No.
version. So in that one, we have Matt Damon as Ripley, and they emphasize more of like his boyishness and his charm.
Yeah.
And I think this version of Ripley resonated with me more, which I don't know what that means, but he's older, he's a little more down on his luck. He seems world weary.
Yeah.
Whenever he has to kill someone in order to keep his little scam going, there's like a sense of exhaustion
Yes.
of like, fuck, now I gotta, because he's not like super great at covering his tracks, but he's like smart enough to stay ahead of the cops.
Yeah, I do like the fact that there's times when he does get away with stuff. He's like, that's it?
And he's even shocked, yeah, at how easy,
Yeah.
because he kept like, and they kind of show us places where he fucked up as he goes, like,
Yeah.
he leaves a blood stain on a staircase, and the camera makes sure to point that out. And so then later, when someone points it out, there's that tension of, oh fuck, he's about to get caught. And then, like, the landlady thinks it was the cat. She caught a
Yeah.
mouse or something, and like,
which is,
yeah,
like, it's the great thing is like there's so many shots of that cat.
and they
where
really established it, yeah. Uh,
you're like, man, that camera person really fucking loved that cat. Like,
there's several other supporting cast members, and I would say most of them I think are kind of replaceable with other actors,
yeah.
other than Andrew Scott. Like, I can't imagine anyone else doing Ripley. The only supporting character who I really loved didn't come in until 3 episodes until it was over, and that was Maurizio Lombardi as the Italian inspector,
Yeah.
who is, I don't even know how to describe that character like best. It's just you have this assumption he's going to be like detectives you've seen in other media and read about in books or seen on TV. But because this is a story about Tom Ripley, and Tom Ripley is a guy that just seems to almost magically get away with everything, this detective is so self-assured that as he goes further down this path trying to catch Ripley, the more desperate and pathetic he starts to look.
Yeah.
And so it was just, and that, especially that actor Maurizio Lombardi, who I think he was in The Young Pope also. He was
Yeah.
like a cardinal that was kind of the main antagonist. He's just such a great foil against Andrew Scott's Tom Ripley.
Yes, because it's like even though he's not playing it too overly eager, it is just Also, the sigh of resignation when he's just like, "Oh, I finally found something that's gonna uncover him," and then someone's like, "Oh no, that was a fluke. We already fixed it."
Well, and then when Ripley starts to realize he's got this guy beat,
Yeah,
the way he just kind of like teases him with this sort of quietly acknowledging, sort of like, well, I did it, but you don't really have any proof that I did it, do
yeah,
you? And it's so well done, I think. And I'm glad that it was a mini series. I don't think they should. I know there's sequel books. I'm like, just don't even touch them.
no.
I think it's a perfect little story here, and I think it was maybe like 8 to 10 episodes or so, just perfectly executed. All right, Ariana, what is your number 4 favorite media thing?
So it was finishing My Brilliant Friend, the
Okay,
books, and also the series.
okay,
So the books go into a little bit more of a darker ending, in my opinion.
okay.
But I think the series was a little bit more uplifting. It was a frustrating watch,
The show?
the show, but it had to do with the fact that we just didn't have a good
Well, we were pirating it
yeah,
over a streaming website, and I mean, it's great that those exist, but man, is their bandwidth shit.
yeah,
But going back to the show,
yes.
so we watched seasons 1 through 3 last year, and they were on my favorite TV watch list of last year. Talk about what was different in season 4.
Season 4 is when they do finally have older actors playing the
Everyone, except for
everyone.
like the parents.
Yes. And I understood like were a lot of people online that were just like let the girls just play older version of themselves, but I don't think that the makeup would have really done them any favors.
Yeah, now that it's over, I kind of go,
And
yeah, I think you had to age him up.
and I think it's just they didn't allow for enough quiet moments for Linu because Linu has so many like thoughts going through her head. Um and it's not like so much of a fail, but it's just like I think it's very hard for those two actresses to mimic one another when the first actress like Linu is just
Margarita Marcuzzo, I
is
believe is her name now.
is acting through silence.
And she's in the season 4, she's played by Alice Rohrwacher, who
Yes.
we've seen in lots of her sister's
She's
movies. Oh, she's great,
she's a
yeah.
great actress, but I think it's like,
It,
how do you mimic someone who's just stands back a lot of
so
time?
what was more of your favorite? This fourth season or reading the whole series?
I think reading the whole series was my favorite thing. Watching it was great because at the least like the actress that they got for Leela,
Yeah,
she
very
was
good.
incredibly spot on when the facial expressions, but like Leela was always going to be easier to mimic, right? When you think about it.
Yeah,
Like this sternness, this meanness that comes
she's
through.
a broader character than Linu. There's so much subtlety in that
Yes.
performance.
But it's also like it's that feel of getting older that the show did so well, especially the last few episodes.
Yeah, like the feel of time passing so quickly.
Yes.
And it like that's what kind of made me very sad at the end was you just are making these big like decade jumps.
Yes.
And I think when you're younger, you don't necessarily you might not connect to that, but when you're, in your 40s and especially the way COVID has fucked up my perception of time, yeah, like you feel that kind of, oh, it's the rush of time.
Yes, because like the bigger events take longer to conclude when you think about it.
Well, and it's also when you're younger, the time feels slower, and so you're paying so much more attention to those
But it's
details.
also when you're younger, you're already like you're hungering to be older and not realizing that getting older means routine, means building up stamina for certain things.
It's the reverse of that phenomenon where like when you're doing something miserable, it feels like it takes forever, but when you're doing something you enjoy, it flies by.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, what you're saying is you reach that age where suddenly you're like, oh, I kind of like being in this world and like to just be in this moment, and I'm not trying to rush to get to the next thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think they capture that very perfectly towards the end of the series.
Well, and I thought the final scene between the two women,
Yes.
which was basically a monologue by the actress playing Leela,
Yeah.
like was just this perfect like pin in the show. And then the final scene where Linu gets the letter
Yeah.
and everything is kind of concluded. It did remind me of, I think it did a good job of taking where, you're born into this world and you might encounter two elderly people who, like, they used to be friends, but they don't talk anymore. And you're just you've just shown up.
Yeah.
This is like taking those people and going all the way back to their childhood to tell you the story of why did they end up like that?
Yes.
Why did they end up, they were such close friends. Why all of a sudden one day did they just drift apart and never really talk again? Okay. Well, my number 4 on my list of favorite media things is the video game Balatro.
Oh boy.
So Balatro was a game that I think it had been about a year. There had been some demos on Steam, and I had played those demos. I think the last demo before the game fully came out, I beat that demo. Like I beat everything you could possibly do on it. It's developed by Local Funk, so it's a one-person design game, and you can get it, I think, like at this point on every platform that games can be played on, including mobile. Uh, and it's a game where you play poker hands to score points and defeat blinds. So you have a blind that is a point goal, and you have, I think, maybe 5 hands that can be augmented based on other cards, increasing or lowering how many hands. And so you're just trying to beat that blind in as few poker hands as possible. But then the roguelike elements come in, which roguelike is games where you can kind of unlock things and then change the way you play. So there's the potential to like break and overpower the game, but you have to be lucky enough to get the right stuff. So in Balatro, it uses all these variations on jokers. I think you can have 5 jokers in play at once, and jokers can add chips, they can increase your multiplier. Those are just kind of the simple things. Then they get into crazy shit where like you can have jokers that generate money at the end of every round that you play.
Yeah.
Or you can have jokers that make it where you can play a flush, but it's like all cards that are red count towards a flush, all cards that are black count towards a flush. So that means if you have a mix of clubs and spades, you can play those as a flush.
Yeah.
They have ones where you can take like a straight and make it where you can play it with one less card than you need to. And those are just some of the simpler ones. There's one card that's a knife, and based on where you put that with your jokers, it kills the joker, but absorbs its ability into itself. So at the end of every round, this one card just stacks up to like it can do dozens of things at the end of a round. So it can get very chaotic in this game. There's also multiple decks that also include little variations. So you might have a deck where there's no face cards in the whole deck. So then that's going to change the way you play. And then with each deck, you have difficulty levels. I think there's like maybe 9 difficulty levels. When I first downloaded this game, I was like tearing through it. I think the first time I played the red deck, I won. And that's like the most simple, basic deck you can start with. And that probably came from playing the demo. But having the full game, like I can't imagine a time where I will ever beat this full game because it gets fucking hard at a certain point. Almost hard to a level of absurdity where it does feel like you need very specific jokers. So you're just hoping you get this like one joker out of hundreds. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to like reset the whole run because you're like, I can't. The antes for the blinds get so high at a certain point that like you're kind of depending on luck. But Balatro, I think it won Game of the Year at the Game Awards and Best Game Direction and Best Independent Game and Best Debut Indie Game and Best Mobile Game. So if you are someone who likes to play on your phone, I have not played the mobile game, but I've heard great things about it. I've only played on the PC. But yeah, Balatro logged far more hours than any other game on my laptop in the year of 2024.
All right.
All right, Ariana, what is your number 3 favorite media thing?
It was reading The Lath of Heaven by Ursula
Lathe.
Lathe of Heaven
Yeah.
by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Le Guin.
Le Guin.
I may be wrong on that one, but I've always
Okay.
thought it was like Le Guin, but
Le Guin.
I don't know. But yes, one of her books is one of my next books I'm going to read.
So this is the first time I've ever read anything of hers.
And that was the first book of hers I ever read, yeah.
And I think this was released in like
60s or 70s?
like the 70s.
Fun fact, they turned it into a BBC miniseries
Oh boy.
that is It's definitely back when if you think like the Chronicles of Narnia stuff, it's
Yeah.
that kind of budget level, but it's not necessarily a book that needs a huge budget. 1971 was when it came
Yeah,
out.
I mean, it is a book that basically it is a man who has discovered that he's changing the world through his dreams.
Mhm.
Goes to a professor because he's starting to
He's
take
like a psychologist, right?
psychologist because he's been caught abusing medical cards from other people
And for
to
what reason?
to basically have dreamless sleep.
It's like drugs you can take where you don't have dreams. Yeah.
And so in order for him to like to be not have to go to jail or go through any repercussions, he has to go to the psychologist who is basically using the dreams to try to better the world.
What's that thing of given infinite power? You're like, no, I could fix it all
Yeah, and
without
it
any
is.
input from anyone else.
And it's also like the increasingly frustration from the psychologist because he's like he's fucking misinterpreting my like the things that I'm telling him. And I was oddly surprised to figure out, like, oh, when I finished reading the book, I was just like, all right, let me see what year was this made because, like,
It felt more modern to
it
you.
felt way more modern without telling on itself.
They do a good
It,
job of creating a future that isn't dated.
yes,
Yeah.
and so it was also just being like, it's an alternate universe of sorts where different wars or different famines have already occurred. And then through the fact that his dreams are changing, therefore, like nothing is solidified. And he's starting to also start to question his own like memories because things change so many times.
My takeaway when I read it was it's a book about trauma because
Yes.
he's trying to escape. Because once you get to the part where it shows you how this all started, it's
Yes.
like fucking heartbreaking. Like the circumstances under which he starts dreaming to change things.
Yeah.
Uh, what did you think of the ending of the book?
I thought it was a kind of bittersweet ending because, like, at the end, the main character gets what it is that he wants, but it's also he's dealing with the fact that the spouse that he has is confused as to who she is because, like, so many alterations have happened to her, and
Because it's essentially like a three character story. Yeah.
yes. And so it's this interesting thing that at one point, like the psychologist asked for race not to be a factor, so they all wake up and everybody has gray skin.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And the psychologist is so excited because he's just like, well, that was a clever way to fix it. I didn't think you'd go this
Yeah.
route. Or like how aliens had come in, and he's like,
The alien invasion stuff was
he's
very
just like,
interesting.
why did you go for these type of aliens? Like, or he'll be like, oh well, I asked you to stop the war. He's like, but you didn't say stop an invasion. Like you did like there's always gonna be complications in life.
Well, yeah, it's I think she was presenting the idea that we should seek perfection, but also know that it's a very hard thing to get. Um, and this sort of you also can't fix it all by yourself, because I think that's the attitude of the psychologist in the story
Yeah.
is he thinks, oh, you just give me this power, I'll solve all the problems.
Yeah.
So I'm about to read, I haven't started it yet, but it is the next book I'm going to be reading is The Dispossessed, which is a novel. It's a anarchist utopian science fiction novel that's part of a cycle of books she did. But everything I've read said like you can read this book and you don't have to read anything else. And I believe I don't know if that's Left Hand of Darkness because that's another book she wrote. I think this might be one that's kind of talking about gender and sexuality. But Le Guin is often put in the same category as Octavia Butler.
Yeah.
Very kind of their science fiction is less concerned about the technology, though they talk about that,
Yeah.
but it's more about the evolution of like the human psyche and emotions and social structures and things like that.
I could definitely see that.
But I'm very glad you enjoyed because did I recommend Lathe of Heaven to you? Or I put it on your Kindle
Yeah, as
probably.
much as my Kindle can just be like a Russian roulette, I try to see what
It's a Seth recommendation device.
I mean, there's books that I want, but I have to like ask for.
I mean, whatever you want, I download for you. Eh, don't touch me. So next on my list of my favorite media things from this year was reading the entirety of Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men run. This was a 16-year run of comics. It's probably the longest comic book run I've ever read in like a single year.
Yeah, and I felt like I went through it with you too.
Fuck you.
Like as you explained.
So Chris Claremont started writing Uncanny X-Men in 1975. He left in 1991. And during that time, basically created the X-Men as we know it. They originally were created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in I think 63. But the concept of the X-Men, I've read all of those issues too. I think it's like 66 issues of that. And some other creators come along, and it's highly variable in quality. Some parts are really good, and some parts are just a drag. There's some really awful villains. I hated the characterization of Magneto. He
Yeah.
just feels very like one-dimensional. So when Claremont comes along, the X-Men are not like a best-selling comic. Their comic had become a reprint comic of the previous 66 issues.
Boy.
So like with issue 67, it reprints issue 1. So that's how they kept X-Men on the stands for like years, was just reprinting the old issues. And then the characters would pop up here and there, like Marvel team up and things like that. But Claremont, he comes on board after Len Wein and Dave Cockrum reboot it with giant size X-Men.
Yeah.
So they're technically the ones that bring in Nightcrawler, Storm, Colossus, Wolverine. But Claremont does he does all the writing after that.
He's the
So,
one that gets life.
yeah. And some of the interesting things that I'll note from that, because there's a lot to say about it, and we don't have that time here, but I'll just note that it was very clear to me that Nightcrawler was meant to be the sort of flagship character at the beginning, not Wolverine. At a certain point, he kind of loses steam with Nightcrawler and switches over to Storm as the sort of main character that drives X-Men. And I would say she is all the way through until like the end of the 80s. And that was one thing that stunned me with how much of a backseat Storm has been given in the cartoons and the films, that she was a character that Claremont invested a lot of time in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't surprise me, right? She's a black woman. And so in American media, she's not going to get the focus. It was interesting to learn how the end of his X-Men run came down, which was the rise of the sort of star artist at Marvel.
Yeah.
You had Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, and Mark Silvestri. Those last two are the ones that end up on Uncanny. And they get a new editor, Bob Harris, of the mutant titles. And he wants a classic mutant team with as many of the X-Men that fans love on it. And by that time, Claremont had kind of turned the book into like Mutants, the comic. And it was
Yeah.
just kind of jump from story to story. There'd be a group of mutants in Ireland. There's a group of mutants in the States. There's a group of mutants in Australia. And they're all having their own stories. And it was almost more of like an anthology book. And the last straw apparently came when they told him he had to bring Colossus back. And he had written an ending for Colossus where he had retired as a painter under an assumed name in the East Village in New York. And it was like happily ever after the end of Colossus.
Yeah.
And so Claremont is writing the issue where he has to bring Colossus back. And he just goes to Bob Harris and goes, I cannot finish this comic. And so if you look at the writing credits, it's Claremont as like plotting it, but then dialogue, scripting it is someone else.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was just interesting to read because I had heard about it so much my whole life that to finally sit down and read those comics. And it also had me think of this interesting thing that happens to me with movies and comics and books and all kinds of media. There's the me before I actually experience it, where
Yeah.
I have all these ideas from having heard about other people's feelings about it. And then when you finally experience it yourself, you do feel different afterwards, or at least I do. It feels like, oh, now there's a part of pop culture I understand in a way that I didn't before. And the misconceptions I had about this are completely gone. And in turn, it actually has completely changed the way I look at the X-Men.
Yeah, I think that's the way I felt like when I first watched Fellini.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was supposed to watch. I thought it was gonna be more, I guess, Eastern European when I think about it.
What do you
Like,
think about like the Bela Tarr films?
yeah, just like this sad, like never-ending, beautiful images, only for it to be a lot more wholesome than I thought it was going to be, a lot more funnier than I thought it was going
A
to
lot
be.
more easy for an unfamiliar viewer to connect with.
Yes.
You didn't have to know a lot about Fellini.
No.
You didn't have to be into art film. You're just good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say since reading Claremont's X-Men, in the new year, because I've already read it now, is Frank Miller's Daredevil, and that was another experience of there was the me before I actually read it, and then there's the me after it, and the me after reading is like, oh yeah, I can really understand why people thought that was good.
Yeah.
But also, wow, that's so simple compared to like picking up a Daredevil comic now.
Yeah.
There were actually like one and done issues in a Miller run instead of, well, this is like part 3 of an 8-part arc we've been doing, and
Or
we got to
like,
read them all.
look at this reference to understand what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Blah blah blah.
So your number 2 favorite thing from
I thought we were going to number 1.
no.
Oh yeah, the Marias.
You need to say that. The Marias?
The Marias.
The Marias. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, the Marias.
You're gonna have to explain what the fuck this is.
They are a band. And I think for a while I was kind of avoiding listening to them. So they have Spanish and English songs led by a Puerto Rican artist and a Californian producer who used to be a couple but are no longer a couple, but they're still producing music together. Um the vibe that I get from them is like a grown-up version of XX.
I don't know if I know much about XX.
They
I know
used
there's
to
a
be like
band.
an indie
Yeah.
band.
I think I might
just,
have tried to listen to them. They weren't
you
my
know,
thing.
they just like when you listen to them, it was kind of like having conversations back and forth. Like,
Sounds awful to me.
and this one is just more psychedelic punk
Okay.
funk to it. It kind of reminds me of like the early 90s. I have a hard time sometimes trying to get into new music, but I think it's also like that reflection of my age. That I feel
Well, it's like you have the sounds that you like, and new stuff sometimes doesn't contain those sounds, and so you're like, I'll just listen to the sounds I like.
Or it's also like you get to the point that you're like, yeah, I've heard all the sounds that I'm used to. Like I want something new, but I don't want to be disappointed.
Or some of the new stuff is just like bad.
I mean, like I don't.
Well, I mean, among indie stuff, it's probably better. I'm thinking of like mainstream music.
I think
Feels very formulaic and boring.
I think mainstream music has been getting better, but I think it's also just this idea that like Taylor Swift is no longer like the ideal, right?
But she is.
She has
she's
influence.
She's an
really
archetype
hard.
now in music.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have women referred to as, oh, she's like Taylor Swift. Because like people go like, oh, for Chapel Roan, I'm sure someone somewhere has said, oh, she's like Taylor Swift but a lesbian.
Like for the gays.
Yeah, she's like Taylor Swift for gays.
Yeah, when it's not the case at all. So I've been really enjoying their music lately. It's also just nice to see like bands that are including between English and Spanish because of like many generations that either flip through both. There is like the drama of the lyrics in Spanish, which she acknowledges has to do with like listening to Mexican like rock music, which can be extremely dramatic in versus American.
There's like a lot of mariachi ballads, right? That's that same kind of like very overly romantic, emotive kind of stuff. Yeah.
And so I've been really enjoying listening to them.
And they're called the Marias?
The Marias.
The Marias?
Marias.
Okay. Well, my number 2 favorite media thing was discovering the role play writings of Cesar Capacal, and I'm not sure if I'm getting that last name right. He publishes things mostly on itch.io, and he actually complimented one of my actual plays of one of his games, which made me feel very good because anytime I play a solo tabletop game, I'm always hoping that I'm playing it correctly, that I've read the rules right, but sometimes, you just miss a sentence or two here or there.
Or this is just a sneaky way of people knowing, hey, if you compliment Seth, you can be able
yeah, it will be. So the first thing, I want to talk about 2 books that he put out. The first one was Random Realities, which takes the concept of the solo RPG Oracle. It's often a D100 list where you'll roll 2 10-sided die, and the list will be themed. So it could be sounds. It could be things found in a like mad scientist laboratory. And then by rolling these things, it's supposed to kind of spark your creativity and take you down, an interesting path. So he came out with Random Realities, which has over 60 Oracle results on each page. And there's even a digital version where you can just click on the dice and it'll randomly take you to a page. And so it's kind of a strange thing to describe, and it's a universal tool, so you can use this with any game. So a single page includes boxes that read things like quest, location, scene, world. And then within those boxes, there will be, 3 to 9 different results. So for example, you look at a location box, and you'll have past and present, descriptor, trouble, building, influence, mood, rumor, seeks and offers. And the whole goal here is that you don't want these to be as least specific as possible, but still evocative of something. So like past and present, you have coronation hyphen vineyard. So it means in the past, the coronation of someone happened here. But in the present, it's a vineyard. So now that causes you to start to think of all kind, like, so was the vineyard there when the coronation occurred, or did they plant the vineyard as a result of this coronation? And if so, what is the connection between grapes and wine and whoever it was that was coronated?
Yeah.
And right, you already start to have this kind of story weaving in your head. Or if in the location box, if you look at influence in the location, Assassin's Guild. So what would happen is if you're wanting to figure out a location, you wouldn't just go to one page. You would take the influence of one page and then roll and take the descriptor of another page, and you're slowly starting to build this like unique thing. And because of all the possible variations, he even has pictures that you can use as inspiration rather than just words. And that actually helped me do a solo campaign that I ran from like the summer into the fall. It was using these tools as world building. And then the second book I want to talk about of his is actually a game. It is called Against the Wind, and it is a solo, you can also do it as co-op, sandbox game. So basically you're just creating your character, and you're creating the world. There's procedures of how to roll the dice to draw a world map, because it tells you like draw a line going inward, draw a line going outward, like depending on the numbers. So you can generate like what look like real continents. And then once you have that, as your character's traveling around, you're generating locations you're visiting in the world. And the cool thing about it is it uses a variation of the move system from Powered by the Apocalypse, for anyone that's familiar with that. You roll 2d6. On a 10 or higher, it's a hit. On a 9 or lower, you have 2 options. It's a miss, and you deal with the consequences, or you make an effort, which means you have to burn resources to result up to a 10. So, and those resources come from your character sheet, because your character sheet is a bunch of words. There's barely any numbers on it. So let's say you are trying to get a merchant to tell you about the stock that he keeps in the back, the black market illegal stuff, and he doesn't want to show you. Well, if you look over your character sheet, you might find something like, oh, well, my eyes are penetrating and sharp. So that's going to help me add to my roll because I'm very observant and I'm going to notice things, right? Or you have one option on your character sheet, which is a gift. So in one instance, your gift might be foresight. So you already had a vision that told you where they are and what to say to him. And so it's as long as you're using the resource in a way that sounds logical with the situation, it's completely allowed. And because it's solo, the cool thing is there's no rules lawyer that's going to argue with you. So it's very much not a simulationist game where those sort of not grimy, but crunchy and gritty games where it's all about making it as realistic as possible and measuring, your distance from your target. This is very narrative and very influenced by like classic fairy tales like Hans Christian Andersen. And so I was able to play through 4 sessions of it and ended in a way that I had tons of things left. This also has another collection of over 60 tables that you can roll to create. I created a little town, and I even created like streets and businesses on them just by rolling. I was able to draw it all out and like had encounters with like shopkeepers and people on the street. And I would say if you're someone who is willing to bring the creativity to the table, because that's a big part of solo, is the game can't imagine it all for you.
Yeah.
You use it as a jumping off point. I would say Against the Wind is a great game for people who aren't interested in the sort of number crunching that goes with a lot of tabletop games. Mhm. So, Ariana, your number one media thing from 2024.
We haven't finished it yet, but it is still one of my favorite things, and it will remain to be one of my favorite things to watch. It's Taskmaster.
Oh, we're in the current season. We're still
Yes, and I think the one of my favorite contestants, even though I've loved a lot of
Rose
contestants,
Matafeo.
I mean, I've loved her, but Rosie Jones.
Who's current on the, I guess not currently because the series ended, but the most recent season, yeah.
Yes. And she has been a delight to watch throughout this whole season. To those who don't know, Rosie Jones is a comedian slash writer from like England who has
Cerebral palsy. Mhm.
And so it was one that I was assuming, oh, they're going to adjust things for her.
And there are a few places where they do.
Yes.
Yeah, but not too much.
But most of the time, she's doing the task the same as everyone else. And what cracks me up is the fact that she has no problems using her disability or making fun of the fact that she has a disability to make others feel like fucking shit.
But she's doing it knowing like she doesn't want them to feel like shit. She knows it's funny
Yeah,
to be like that.
yes, it's like she's with Jack D and they're supposed to be teamed up in like a thing together.
And his whole comedy shtick is he's like the sort of grumpy middle-aged man.
Yes, and it's supposed to be he's a grumpy, dark-humored man who thinks of death often and wishes to be like taken out of this planet as quickly as possible.
And she's like a very sassy early 30s woman with cerebral palsy.
Lesbian,
Yeah.
like who is like my favorite is when she like made her tone as sad as possible, just being like, because I was going to
Well, you have to explain the context.
Yes.
So it was a task where one member of the team gets to look in a box.
Uh-huh.
They cannot speak, or no, they can't move, nod their head or shake their head yes or no, right? They can answer, and they can't answer any questions out loud.
Yeah, they
can make noises.
Yes.
And so the person who is providing the responses to the other players was given a secret task that said every time they answer a question correctly, everyone in the team loses a point from their total.
Yeah.
And so no, the other players didn't know that there was this person on their team that was lying. So in the case of Rosie and Jack,
yes,
she didn't know he was lying at the time until they were in the studio audience and Alex and Greg reveal this was the secret task. So then you describe what she did to be sort of comedically manipulative.
She was, when I got invited to Taskmaster, I was so happy because they'd let me know that my team was going to be with Jack D, who happens to be my comedy like hero.
Icon, yeah, which is not true, I'm sure.
And like his face where he's just like, oh no, she's going to ruin me. And I love also that like the shift that she goes like, oh, now you're being clever and other stuff. It's just, I love Taskmaster. It's one of my favorite shows. It makes me happy.
It never gets old, does it?
It's weird because I can't go back to rewatch old seasons. Not because I can't, it's just
because you know who's going to win.
I think like I can completely make myself forget about that. That's not an issue. I think it's just like it's a show that is better if you enjoy it with another person.
Oh. So who do you think about enjoying it with?
Kelsey.
Fuck you. So my number one favorite media thing from 2024 that I read was Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is a book I can remember seeing mentioned in like, I think Wizard magazine when I was a kid, where they'd occasionally have something about like science fiction books comic book fans might like. And I remember reading the description, and once again, this was something that in my head I had a very different view of it. So the book is essentially a reframing in science fiction of the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer.
Okay.
In this instance, this is set in the 28th century.
Okay.
And the hegemony of man is what this expanse of hundreds of planets that humans have colonized is called.
Okay.
And it's not every part of known space, but almost all of known space is controlled by the hegemony of man. There's an alliance with the Technocore, which is a civilization of AIs that exist in a parallel digital dimension,
Yeah.
but then can like manifest in our world through like technology. And then there's also the Ousters, who are these rebel humans that broke off because they didn't like the idea of this large, expansive hegemony of man, and then have technologically modified themselves over time. So they just don't even resemble humans at this point,
Yeah.
but they're still humans. So the planet of Hyperion is home to the Time Tombs, which is such a like Doctor Who sounding thing, right? But they're these sort of Stonehenge kind of ancient thing. Nobody knows where it came from, but they do know there is some sort of like time field around them that makes time operate weird when you're close.
Okay.
They've started opening from the inside, and nobody knows what's going to happen when they do. So there's all of these forces are headed. They know that the Ousters are going to invade Hyperion. So this is a final pilgrimage of these people who have spent their lives interested in the Time Tombs to try to like one last chance to figure out what the hell is this.
Yeah.
So the whole novel is the journey to the Time Tombs.
Okay.
And it's like 700 pages. And it's just them going from point A to point B. And we have these different travelers who tell their stories, just like in the Canterbury Tales, about why it is they're interested in this.
Yeah.
Like, why are they coming? So, like, the priest tale, he shares the journal of another priest, a Catholic priest, who had come to Hyperion before, and what his experience was, where he finds the Bikora, who were humans that had crashed on an Ark ship, I think, that was coming to Hyperion, but they crashed in a place that's isolated by these regular wildfires, so nobody could get in to rescue them, and generations have gone by. So the priest wants to be a missionary and like because he's like these people don't know anything about God or anything. And then the whole like strange experience he has. We get the Soldier's Tale, which I really liked, which is like almost like an action war kind of thing, and that kind of informs you about the ousters and these is very Warhammer like. You have things like this. I think it's the Scholar's Tale is the one that almost made me cry. I won't say why in case you do read this or any of our
Okay.
fans do, but it's like the saddest story. There's the Detective's Tale, which is just like a noir, and that involves the AI and farcasting, which is this sort of faster than light technology that lets you jump. You just walk into it and you end up on another planet. So she does this thing where like she tails her suspect by going through a bunch of different farcasters and ending up on different planets and different places. And and then the thing that's at the center of all this is Hyperion is supposed to be the home of this legendary creature known as the Shrike, who they think is like artificial intelligence who just kills whatever is in his path. And he's just like his body is like jagged with horns and blades and all of this. It's something that when you see it, you know this is like a killing machine. There's no
Yeah.
doubt that it would do anything else. And the thing that really made this stick with me is the world building is so strong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's smart because each story does world building on a different aspect of the world, but in a subtle way where it doesn't announce itself. It slowly unfolds some information. Then you realize when you're done with that story, oh, now I understand this thing that got mentioned a lot better.
Yeah.
And then you go into the next story. The book ends with them standing in front of the time tombs.
Oh.
And that's the end of the book.
Okay.
But there's a series. I've not heard great things about the rest of the series except for the next book, The Fall of Hyperion, which I've seen people say, read the first two books and you can just stop the series. Like you don't need to read anything else. Like none of this is essential. So I don't know if in 2025 I'm going to read The Fall of Hyperion, but I would say if you haven't read this first book, Hyperion, definitely worth your time. Just it will immerse you in its world. That's the vibe I got from it. So when we come back, we will be doing our top 5 favorite films of 2024. Three stories revolve around a man who tries to take control of his own life, a policeman whose wife seems like a different person, and a woman who searches for someone with a special ability. This is my number five pick on my top five favorite films of 2024. Kinds of Kindness, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, starring Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons, Willem Dafoe, and many, many, many other people.
Many other people.
Many, many other people. So I really love the work of Yorgos Lanthimos. There are people who do not. And I think that's totally fine that they don't. I think the kind of films that he makes are intended to be abrasive.
Mhm.
They're intended to rub you the wrong way, possibly, if you're not on his wavelength. But for me, I find his satire just perfect. It's exactly what I like. This movie, because it's an anthology film, I was a little worried if I would like it or not. Because my track record with anthology movies is not too great.
Mhm.
But I think because this is an anthology film under one director, and it made me go back and think about Wes Anderson and that collection of short films he did for Netflix last year.
Yes.
And I think it worked because you had a consistent vision for each film. Anthologies where you have multiple directors and they each direct a segment, that's where I feel you're rolling the dice because I think some of those short films will be good, some of them won't. With this, I enjoyed every moment of it. I loved the absurd nonsense world it took place in
Yes.
because I think that's something that frustrates people is they're wanting a film that is presenting something logical to them. But what I find is the way Lanthimos portrays human beings feels weird to the human beings, but when you really think about it, it's much more accurate than what you see in a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, people are bored.
Irrational.
Are just sort of like, this is what it is. What do you expect?
You have people who get horny and make bad decisions. That's a
Mhm.
big Lanthimos trope. You have people who don't really give a shit about anyone else and just are out for themselves. You have people who think that by manipulating others, they're helping them.
Yeah.
I think Willem Dafoe's character in the first short film is such a
Yes.
weirdo creep. But then you have the whole Jesse Plemons, Emma Stone thing in the second film where they thought she had died, but she said she was
Yeah.
on a deserted island full of dogs that helped her. And he believes it's not his real wife who came back. And then the last one where Emma Stone is part of the cult that's searching for a healer, a hands-on
Yeah.
healer. Uh, I also feel like Margaret Qualley is another standout in these films because she had a role with not a single line of dialogue, I don't think, in Poor Things.
Yeah.
She has a lot more to do here, especially in the last short film.
Yes.
And I know that Lanthimos and Stone feel like they're a partnership we're going to be seeing a lot from for the foreseeable future. I really want to see more from Margaret Qualley because this year I think we watched maybe 3 or 4 movies that she was in,
Yes.
and she's so good.
She's very natural.
Yeah. That was my number five. What is your number five, Ariana?
My number 5 is I Saw the TV Glow.
Okay.
Directed by Jane Schoenberg.
Mm-hmm.
Was released in January 18th.
Well, that was Sundance.
Yeah.
So I think it came out mid-year about. It was like summertime, I think.
Yeah.
Into the fall when it came out for us to watch. Tell me why this is number 5 on your list. Why
I
is
think
it
it's
starting that
one
high?
of those films, whenever I think about the top 5 are films that have stick to my brain no matter what I've watched afterwards. And the thing is, like, this year has been a year for plenty of good films, right?
Yeah.
There are films that I would not argue against to you if you were just like they had something that stand out about it. I get it. This is just something that has stuck to me because it just feels familiar and it also just feels like sticky to a certain degree of like either I've had experiences like that or I've known people like that. Um, I Saw the TV Glow has Justice Smith, who unfortunately we watched in what that
Magical Society of Magical Negroes.
which was
Oh,
not good. And then
this actress right here.
we had Bridget Londi Payne.
Mhm.
Um, two unlikely friends, you could say, within the film.
Bond over a show they both love.
Bond over a show that they both love.
Or he hasn't seen it yet when he meets her, right?
He wants to see it but hasn't seen it, so because he wants to, that is the gateway into how they become friends.
And it's kind of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer inspired. It's not
Yes.
directly copying the whole thing.
But it's also this interesting thing where they don't really tell you it's Buffy, but it's just like those
Teenage girls in a small town fighting the supernatural.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
also like that thing that we saw a lot like during the early 2000s,
CW kind of stuff.
CW, which is like magical girls kind of thing. All, we want to pull the strings of like Sailor Moon, but like give it an edge.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of Sailor Moon influence too, I thought,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it is also just having to follow Justice's character, despite the fact that like in a more mainstream film, we would be following Bridget's character.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Bridget's character would be a feel-good movie of a person finally being themselves.
Yeah, because it's a film about two characters who are closeted
Yes.
in different ways.
Yes.
And one of them comes out.
Yeah. And the other one doesn't. And what is the downfall of doing that to yourself? What is the fact that you have made yourself small to accommodate everyone else in your life because you don't want to disturb them, or you don't want to hurt them, or you don't want to have to be brave during that time? And how, because of that, and that is something that a lot of people are guilty with even now, is they lose themselves in media, right? Are you a Taylor Swift fan, or like are you a Sabrina Carpenter kind of person? Or it's also the fact that even nowadays, like as being queer and being part of the LGBTQ plus community, I'm not saying is in mode, but I think people are now being more open about it.
It's more diverse than it's ever
Yeah,
been.
because we look at the fact that, we talked about Chapel Rowan, who's a lesbian, who likes drag, who identifies as a drag queen
But is a cis woman.
but is performing. But even other drag queens have said like, yes, like of course she is. Then we have like other artists that are trying to mimic that a little bit, or get a little bit of a nibble on it, not understanding that like that moment for her to fully accept who it is that she is did not come without pain, or like scarring, or fucked up
When I feel like this movie does a good job of helping you feel the pain of coming out.
And I think it's also this idea that I think the film represents in a certain way that like it's never too late.
The ending is sad as
It
hell.
is sad as hell.
Yeah.
But it's never too late.
Yeah, it's sort of, the film kind of ends with, well, I guess we just have to keep waiting then.
Yeah.
Like eventually she will come out.
Yes.
But not yet.
Yeah. And like we shouldn't blame him in the meantime.
Or would it be her?
Or like
because the implication is that there is gender fluidity.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, it's made by a trans woman, so that's why I assumed it's probably Owen's character is a trans woman.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
And this unwillingness to accept it because he's not seen anything beyond just that. And how people don't want, like, even though we talk about how like representation matters, it's also this hard thing when the representation is so little that when you do get it, it's just not up to par.
Or if the representation has to be a post-op, traditionally sexually attractive trans woman.
Yeah.
As opposed to like people who are pre-op, or people who maybe their body type doesn't match the culture's definition of what like sexy is.
Also
kind of
just be like this thing of it be like, okay, so I have, and like these people who are out there that are queer or are trans, but I identify in a weirder layer.
Or that's where like kind of the queer term I think gets used,
Yeah.
where you're kind of like, well, I'm not really one thing. I kind of connect to a bunch of things. Where
Yes.
it's a spectrum unto
Yes.
itself. Now, people have criticized this movie, I've seen,
Uh-huh.
saying they don't feel it should be classified as horror because they didn't think it was scary. How do you feel about that? Because I was like, it does. I know like it's officially listed, I think, as horror fantasy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think that might be a better, but I'd still say it falls in the horror category. It's just not a kind of horror that audiences typically expect when they hear that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, I think horror to me also includes a certain amount of dread,
Well, it's like existential horror.
existential dread, and especially with the dread, existential dread that's like, this is it. We're gonna keep doing this, and I don't get to change. I don't get a say in this. I don't get to change it, and if I change it, it's gonna be like that's the scary part. Or it's also just like it does a good thing that this film does a good thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which is sometimes realizing that your imagination is worse than the actual thing that would happen.
Well, it's almost a warning about escapism. That
Yes,
don't escape too long or too far because then you can't
exactly.
find your way back.
Yep, that's it.
And so I think that's what happened. Owen so identifies with this TV show. And that's one of the things I liked about the movie was we see him go back and revisit the TV show as an adult, and I really connected with that of it doesn't look as good, it doesn't look how you remember it. It actually like it went from being this nightmarish thing in his memory to being almost like the Power Rangers when he watches it, very
Yeah,
cheesy.
yeah,
The costumes are not good. And so it's more about what was it about it that drew you to that show as a kid? That's what you need to be thinking about, not the show. Get
yeah.
rid of the show. The show was just the jumping off point. Right. Well, my number four film of my top four films of the year is Honora, written and directed by Sean Baker and starring Mikey Madison, who I'm expecting is probably going to get a lot of award nominations in the new year. So this film is about Honora, a sex worker from Brooklyn, who gets her chance at a Cinderella story when she meets and marries the son of an oligarch. Once the news reaches Russia, her fairy tale is threatened as the parents set out for New York to get the marriage annulled. One of the things I really liked about this film, besides just like how beautiful the movie looks, right, is how funny it is. That was not something I went in expecting. I should have though, because Red Rocket is a funny movie. And but Baker, he does these interesting things where he constantly centers sex workers. I haven't seen any of his films pre-Tangerine, but I'm very interested in seeing those. But Tangerine, The Florida Project, Red Rocket, and Honora, the main characters are all sex workers. And he's doing this not necessarily because I think he has a fascination with sex work purely, but I think he also understands that he wants to make movies talking about class, and sex work is a perfect occupation to approach that with
Yeah.
because there's very few occupations in which class is so front and center. The other person is a client. They're giving you money. When they give you money, you perform sex acts with them. It's a very hierarchical relationship. But even within that, there's a complexity because there's these rules about how the client can interact with the sex worker that kind of give the sex worker, I wouldn't say it fully empowers them, but it creates some boundaries to try to protect them.
It makes also the illusion of power for them,
Yeah.
right? You don't get to touch me this way.
Yeah.
You don't get to remove this article, and then boom, the client can feel special when they're just like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this,"
Yeah.
and you
I
have to be good.
I think Mikey Madison did a fantastic job in this movie, where she's able to balance the sort of pathos of Honora, this woman who is so desperate to make enough money to escape. And I feel like she doesn't really want to be a sex worker, which is why when his name Igor, I think his
Mhm.
name is, offers her. Uh, no, Igor is the bodyguard.
Yeah.
His name is I can't think of him. But yeah, he's the young man that she ends up marrying, the son of the Russian oligarch, where there's a hesitation in her, where she really does not want to go down this path with him, but at a certain point she thinks like, man, this is such a better life than the life that I'm living that I'm just going to dive in head first. I think we're going to be okay,
Yeah.
and it all falls apart for her. Yet when it falls apart for her, the scene where I think they're Armenians
Uh-huh.
that live in Brooklyn that are in the employ of the Russians when they show up at the young man's house. I think it's in Brighton Beach, maybe. There's that area of New York where like a lot of Russian immigrants live. And Mikey Madison really shows some like good comedic chops, physical comedy,
Yeah.
banter. I'm trying to think of who it reminds me of comedically. Who had this kind of like sassy argue back kind of thing going on. Like there's maybe a little Betty Davis in there.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't think she's as good as Gina Rowlands,
Hmm.
but I can see some Gina Rowlands
Yeah,
in
yeah.
there.
The ability to go as intense as needed in order to get the scene through.
And Baker had said that it is influenced by Knights of Cabiria, the Fellini film with his wife in it, who plays the sex worker Cabiria. And I could definitely see that comparison. Now, this is a film you also watched with
Yeah.
me, and I'm not sure if it's on your top
It
five.
is on my top.
Is it your number three?
No.
Okay, so then we'll talk.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
talk more about it when we get to yours.
Yeah.
So what is your number three film?
I thought it was my number
Number
four.
four. Number four. That's what I meant.
Problemista.
Okay, so
So-
Julio Torres.
Julio Torres, who stars in it and is also his first directorial debut. It has Tilda Swinton.
Those are kind of the two people you need to know.
That's the two main characters that you really need to know. Alejandro is an inspiring toy designer who's struggling to bring his unusual ideas to life in New York City. As time on his work visa runs out, a job assisting at Art World Outcast becomes his only hope to stay in the country and realize his dream. Problemista is one of those films that I'm like, I know it's not a perfect film. I know that there probably are higher skilled technical stuff that's been undone, but I cannot get over Tilda Swinton and the fucking phone flash being on. Like when she's talking. Like that was like her phone was even a character in this film.
Well, I would say it's such a perfect encapsulation of Torres's sensibilities
Yes.
that you're like, oh, if you wanted to show someone, I want to introduce you to Julio Torres. You just show them Problemista and they'd understand.
Yeah, and like I think Fantasmas, which is this HBO's like
Sketch comedy series.
stuff, really is like a reflection of Problemista.
I think it would be harder to get into Fantasmas
Yeah.
first. I think Problemista is a better like gateway
it's an intro,
yeah.
because especially like there's a lot of stuff that they do share. Especially when it comes to Julio getting to the point of so much distress and needing money that he basically like goes in essentially looking for sex work. And
Well, tell me, you remember how he meets Elizabeth in the movie?
so he works at a place that freezes people, and she's there because her husband has been frozen, who's an artist. And
It's like a cryogenic slab.
yes, a cryogenic slab. And he is just mesmerized by her. And I I think we reviewed this. This is a very personal film to me where it's what it is you've met crazy and you know it's crazy, but you can't look away, and suddenly you want to invite crazy into your life. That is what Julio does with Elizabeth, played by Tilda Swinton.
I thought this was a pretty good movie. It's in my honorable mentions for the year.
Yeah.
I love that he consistently brings in a lot of the same comedic
Yes.
people. Martín Gutiérrez, who plays his agent in Fantasmas.
Yes.
Greta Titelman, who was the American ambassador in Los Espookies.
Yeah.
And she also shows up in, I don't know if she's in every episode of Fantasmas, but she's in maybe one or two.
Yeah, she's in one or two episodes.
And then I think it was River Ramirez. They play in Problemistas, were they the customer service rep that he calls at one point?
Yeah.
That's one of the best scenes in the movie.
It's
Just
so good.
Because it takes everything you hate about calling customer service for any industry or reason and just like turns it into this horror story. but comedically, so
Yes.
it's very funny. Um, yeah, I thought the ending of this movie, I don't know if I ever could have predicted that's how it was going to end, but it is a pitch perfect ending.
Yeah, it is. It's one where like everything is wrapped up in a nice little bow and just tells you like this was a lesson that needed to be learned. Um, Especially because it's just sort of like, of course, it's not gonna go the way he wants it to at the end because Tilda Swinton is a character is just she's fucking bonkers. But even
Yeah,
during
who did her character remind you of? You say she's fucking bonkers, and I'm like, there was a scene in this movie where I remember you just looked at me.
I know, I think she reflects like past bosses that I've had.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
and where I was just like, I can't
There's someone
like
that you can never please.
no, I could not please. I remember one time,
Like no one could. They just
yeah,
can't.
I remember one time during an argument when I was like, how was I supposed to know that? And they told me, you need to anticipate me.
You need to read my mind.
They're like, what the ever loving fuck? Um, but yeah, it's still one of my top favorites. So
All right. Well, my number 3 film is About Dry Grasses, written and directed by, I'm going to try to pronounce his name. It's Turkish, so I'll probably get this wrong. Nuri Bilge Ceylan. Facing allegations of sexual misconduct, a disillusioned teacher in a remote village meets a colleague who may help make sense of the challenges at hand. This is the second film I've watched from this director. The first one I think was The Wild Pear Tree, and I really like that. But wow, this one was incredible. Now I don't know if this is on your list in your top 3. It's not.
no,
I thought for sure this would be on your
I
list.
knew this was probably going to be on your list, so
Okay, so
I
you
was
wanted to
just
try to
yeah,
vary it. Okay. Well, it's a 3 hour, 17-minute movie,
yes, it is.
but I didn't really feel the runtime.
No,
It's so well paced and so well acted and so gorgeously directed and shot. I think this might be the best looking movie on my list
yes,
because I've never seen snowfall shot so well. I've never seen like sunsets shot so
yeah.
well.
They're like they give the protagonist the hobby of taking photographs, and that is an enough excuse to have these portraits made of people that you don't really know if they are if it's on film or if it's a photograph until something in the background starts moving or you realize someone's blinking or like there's snow falling.
So Samet is our main character. He's a teacher at a rural school in Turkey, and through dialogue, we kind of learn he was assigned here. It's like almost like a government. You have to fulfill a certain number of months or years in service to like a rural community in need, but you can get transfers to larger cities if you want.
Yeah.
And he's desperate to get a transfer because he's just come to really just hate this community he lives in. He's struck up a relationship with Sevim, who is a girl in his class, which right away you get the sense that I don't think anything overtly inappropriate's going on. I just don't see this going down a good path. And you even see him; he's very cagey. He doesn't want anyone to see that he brought her back a gift when he had like left town. And I'm like, yeah, that's very shady to me. He's got a roommate, Keenan, who's a local. And then Samet gets set up on a blind date with Nure, who is a professor at a nearby university,
Yeah.
right? And she is physically disabled.
Mhm.
And he does not know this until he goes to meet her. And then when he meets her, he's very cold during the date
Yeah.
while trying to figure out like a way out. And then he decides, I'll pass her off to Keenan, my roommate, and that way I'll get rid of her. Well, Nure and Keenan hit it off wonderfully to the point
Yeah.
that when they first meet, they just box Samet out of the conversation. And so he gets pissy about that.
And he also starts to get jealous.
Yeah. And then eventually things start happening at school, accusations are made, but because it's still a very patriarchal society, they're kind of given assurances that we don't believe what the girls are saying, but we have to do something in order to appear that we are concerned. Uh, just a wonderful movie about a very deeply unlikable character. Like I found Submit to be a character that was so easy to hate,
Yes.
but I think even the director is telling you, but you can't hate him though. Like we have to try to understand this guy, even if we find him despicable
Yeah.
and we feel like his behavior is terrible. And the reason we have to understand him is because if we can understand him, we can prevent people from ending up like this.
Yes.
If we don't ever understand people like this, then they're just going to keep popping up, and it's going to be a hindrance towards progress of humanity. What did you think about Dry Grasses? I mean, that's not on your list. It's your chance to talk about it.
Dry Grasses just has one of the best like shifts on a what you suspected was going to be a sex scene that you don't really know if it was done in order to be like, we're living in a more conservative like area, let's not convey the sex scene, or it's also just being like Samet is not doing this out of lust or a need to like have release. He's doing this as a performance.
Well, he's selfish, and he's like, if life has to suck for me, I want life to suck for you. Then
And he does it not knowing that Nare is kind of like, he can't affect her.
yeah.
And I think that ultimately does kind of piss him off.
Well, and you were talking about that scene, the weird meta direction that scene
Yes.
takes, that the movie never comes back to or really comments
No.
on. I was like, there's something in that moment that is like a disassociation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's disassociating so strongly to the point that you kind of break the movie.
Yes.
And I don't know if I think The Wonder had a little bit of that last
Yes.
year, where you're like, where does the movie end and reality begin, kind of a thing. But yeah, about Dry Grasses, number 3 on my list. What is your number 3 movie before we go to our break?
It's going to be His Three Daughters. No, it's supposed.
His 3 daughters?
Yeah, that's my number
I
4.
thought at first I thought you said History Daughters.
Yeah, it's number 3.
I thought you said History Daughters, and I was like, did I see History Daughters? I don't, but His 3 Daughters. Yeah, Azazel Jacobs.
Yes.
I think it was a Netflix release.
Yes.
Tell us about His 3 Daughters.
3 distant sisters reunite in New York to care for their sick father. Tensions rise as they confront past issues, aiming to heal family bonds amid laughter and tears.
Okay.
I again, this movie is just it's just stuck to me.
Well, it was the only movie I had a panic attack during.
Yes. I think it's also just like we are like you and I are at that age where we do have to consciously think about when or if our family members are going to become ill and what are the consequences that follow afterwards.
Mhm.
This movie can be viewed in different ways. You can all like instead of just being his 3 daughters, it could be like uh one woman but dealing it with multiple different facets of the way, but it's also just the impact of grief and how sometimes we are so involved in our own little worlds that we don't realize what the other person is doing in order to grieve or go through the process or what their day-to-day life looks like because we're like, well, we wouldn't do it that way.
Who stars in this movie?
It is Natasha Lyonne, Elizabeth Olsen, and Carrie Coon.
Those are the titular 3 daughters.
The titular 3 daughters.
Okay, so explain just briefly, like, what are the personalities? What are the conflicts? Like, what's going on in this film?
So Rachel, played by Natasha Lyonne, has been taking care of the sick father for the past, it seems like 5 years or so.
And she's the eldest, but it
And-
sounds like he adopted her.
Yeah, she's the eldest, but it turns out she was the product of a prior relationship that he just basically raised her. The two of them have a love of sports, of gambling, of being foul-mouthed and watching old movies. We have Carrie Coon, who plays Katie, who is a follow-up of age. She
Middle kid, type A personality.
yes, type A personality, has a teenager, is always arguing with the teenager.
She thinks she has to be in charge of the whole affair.
Feels like she needs to be in charge of it, but then also feels like once she's in charge, she's put up as the bad guy because she's making.
Well, then she wants to complain that I have to do everything.
Yeah. not understanding what everything looked like before. And then there is Elizabeth Olsen's character, Christina, who you would think as a granola hippie type character. Um, you would assume because of that she's going to be flaky, but it turns out she has a whole inner world of her own that they're kind of unaware of.
Well, she's far more complex than what they assume about her.
Yes.
And that's I think one of the reasons I really like the movie is no one here is a caricature.
No, like at the beginning, it can feel like that. And the shots are very centered at the beginning. And I think the shots are done that way to be like, here are the characters, and this is what you're probably going to assume about them. And they're
Very
going to shot,
controlled,
it's like
yeah.
very, and then slowly as we get to know them, the camera becomes a little bit more handheld, a little bit more
Off
wobbly.
center.
Yeah, like it's off centered because the first few shots are straight middle, perfectly shot. The person is right in the middle all the time until you start to get to know everybody.
Well, then even the film starts to play around with like fantasy a little bit.
Yes.
J.O. Sanders, who plays the father, Vincent, and only appears in one scene in the whole movie.
Yes, and that scene is a heartbreaking scene. This film touches also on the base of growing up and realizing I don't really have a relationship with my siblings. And that is a hard thing to realize as we grow up because like when we are children and are around your siblings,
They're your first friends.
they're your first friends, they're the people that you assume you're never gonna like stop loving or laughing with or like caring for. Only for adulthood to sneak in and really like let you know that's not the case because people can be as distant as possible from one another, even if they live in the same state.
Yeah.
Um, and it's one of like the conversations are heartbreaking because, for example, Christina is talking to her three sisters. This is played by Elizabeth Olsen, and she's like telling Natasha Lyonne's character, Rachel, how she was hoping to mend and make a relationship with Rachel only for Rachel to scoff and go, I thought we already had a relationship. And it's that thing that okay, maybe you guys are on the same page. She's wanting to be on the same page. But it's that hurt that it's like you're not really sure, will it be resolved?
Well, it's a film that kind of reminds you that Elizabeth Olsen is a really good actress when you give her an actual good movie to be in instead of just
Yes.
Marvel crap.
Yeah, and it sounds like she's no longer going to do Marvel unless they give her like a huge paycheck.
Yeah, and like I've always like I remember seeing her in Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, which was kind of her breakout movie.
And it was a film that we watched what five
Well,
times.
that's the only film I've ever done the cinematic immersion tank with, where I
Yeah.
watched the same movie for 5 days in a row. And just it's a fun thing to do if you ever get a chance to do that, because you start to see things in movies that you didn't see before, and you really
Yeah.
like. I feel of all the movies I've seen, I understand Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene more than I do a lot of other movies that I've seen. But yeah, his three daughters very good. Felt like could easily be adapted into a stage play
Yes.
very easily. Well, when we come back, we will share our top two favorite films. Seven-year-old Saul spends the day at her grandfather's home, helping to prepare a surprise party for her father. Throughout the day, chaos slowly takes over and fractures the family's foundations. This is my number two pick on my five favorite films of 2024 list. This is Totem, written and directed by Lila Aviles. And this was, I think, her second feature film. Uh, and it blew me the fuck away when I watched it.
Yeah, it is so good.
It was a movie that I heard was good, and I thought, oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll enjoy it. But it's just the decisions that Aviles made as a director are so bold and strong and like absolutely right for each scene. There is a texture to this movie that very few movies I've seen have.
Uh-huh.
Uh, this texture of uh, almost like nature.
Yeah,
There's a sense that nature is invading the home. I always think of the snails crawling along the paintings in the hallway.
yeah,
And the little girl in the film, Soul, she's constantly kind of interacting, she's very tactile. She likes to touch things. She likes to get her hands dirty. And it makes sense when you realize like what's going on in her family is that nature is intruding on the family. The sort of
yeah.
natural process is intervening in a life that they thought they knew where everything was going to go and what was going to happen. And because it's told from the point of view of Soul, it both is able to keep you kind of ignorant to what's going on, but you start to put the pieces together. And then the last 15 minutes of this movie are some of the most beautiful 15 minutes of any film I saw in 2024.
Yes.
The birthday party where she does the dance with her mom.
Yes.
The way Aviles chose to shoot that with this sort of handheld camera and the lighting.
The following of her throughout the whole song.
Yep. And then the final shot of the film and the crazy tone shift
Yeah.
that happens, but is the perfect move. Like, there's no other way you could end the movie this way. Like, you have to shift the tone that dark.
So this is your number what?
This is my number 2.
Okay, so this is my number 1.
Okay. So you want to go ahead and talk about it now?
I mean, it is a fantastic film. The sense of boredom and sadness as a child is
At your
done
grandparents' house. Yeah.
so well. And it's also just like the encroachment that like you are no longer a child.
And that's also the nature coming in, right? It's time to grow up. Like,
And
the
like
world is moving.
it's also just nature, whether we want to admit it or not, is part of decay.
Yeah.
It's like if you are no longer taking care of this space, then we will come in and claim it as our own. And
Or that also kind of what's going on. It's the same thing as having those spaces. You're in a battle with nature all the time, trying to push it back.
so it's just, and then the
Mm.
colors are so well done. That's like these bright greens, this house that just feels like, didn't they have to like make the furniture because she was so specific?
Yeah, I think they built all of the furniture in the movie because Aviles was very specific about the way the chairs should look, the way the sofas should look.
That they should look worn, but like to a certain light and
She
stuff.
wanted to look like it was a real grandparents' house, that like they lived here, these things have been used, this is a real place. But yeah, we also watched Aviles' previous feature, which I think was her debut feature, The Chambermaid,
Uh-huh.
in December, and there's a review of that on the blog. Uh, just talking about that, I didn't think it was as strong as Totem, but that makes sense because Aviles has learned a lot from making The Chambermaid. That then you see those lessons on screen in Totem.
Yeah, and Chambermaid is more like a slice of life situation, not different from this, but it's like several days versus one afternoon.
Well, and Aviles, it seems as though her work, she likes to be very character centered. That her films are not driven by plots, but by a character and sort of questions about that character of how does this character deal with X? How does this character deal with Y?
Yeah.
And such a great filmmaker of like human stories. It has me very interested to see what she does next. Because if the jump from Chambermaid to Totem was so huge, like I'm trying not to hype myself too much
Yeah.
because you're like, man, I'm expecting what comes after Totem to just blow my fucking mind at that
Mhm.
point. So what is your number 2 film?
It's Nora.
Okay. So share your thoughts about Honora, anything that we didn't talk about previously.
So I did realize like part of the story that makes it in the interesting, you want to rewatch it is one of the dancers at HQ, that's where she works, does the same thing that she did to them, which was to dance with their boyfriend or someone of importance to them. Because you remember, like, that redhead starts yelling. I was like, "Did you even dance to so and so?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And then, like, so
Well, it's like clients that they're sort of like, hey, that's my client. I don't want to have to worry that I'm not going to make a certain amount of money off of him every
Well,
week.
it's also
You're
we
dancing with
don't
him.
know like if she was in a similar situation that Honora then finds herself later on, where it's supposed to be like this person is exclusive to you, and whatever happens afterwards is just that's between the two of you. But that's, you don't fuck around with my money, and I won't fuck around with your dudes. And how
It's how you live your life, right?
Yeah, totally. I just go doing whatever the fuck I want, and then I'm like, don't touch my husband. Um, but Honora has these like ripples of sadness along with the hilarity that has with it when like you said, like the Armenians come in and they're like, okay, like we're gonna break this up. This isn't supposed to be what you think it is.
Well, and they're almost Three Stooges like.
Yes,
And their whole focus is just we just don't want the Russians mad at us. So these two young people, you got to go to City Hall. We got to annul this marriage, and we're just not putting up with your shit.
and then it's just like how you're watching her trying to hold on so tight to something that she knew from the get-go she shouldn't have done.
Well, like the Armenians show up, and her newlywed husband just runs
Yeah.
and leaves her behind.
But it's also like he's like trying to hint to her like we need to go now. It doesn't matter how you're
Yeah,
dressed. And she's like, "No, I have to go get dressed. What
yeah.
are you talking about?" Um the hilarity of also just like the deep sadness of it afterwards, where it feels as if like Honora has intermixed the affection, which is supposed to be genuine affection, with an exchange of money, and how
Or that like sex is a transactional act, not something you do because you care about
yeah,
someone.
and then like the interesting thing is like you have Igor who shows an interest in her and shows a genuine care for her, which we have not seen throughout the whole movie versus who she was with before, and how even he has these like parallel lines with her that he is very proud and very loving towards his grandparents.
Well, and he's also very proud of the fact that he's like Russian
Yeah.
and Russian heritage. And that's her full name is not a is she calls herself Annie, but her full name is Honora.
Yes.
And when he sees her ID,
He's like, I like Nora better.
and she is trying to kind of run from that. And
Yes.
there's some subtext there about I think her relationship with her parents or family.
I think specifically with her grandmother, because like when she goes off to insult like Igor's car, he's like, it's my grandfather's car. And she's like, that's when she gets quiet. Because it's just like how those two people could have been maybe like the most stable people in her life, and how she can't even talk about them. She can talk about them when she's explaining why she knows Russian, how she perfectly understands it, but can only speaks like a child because that's probably when her grandfather or grandparent died, right?
Hmm.
They died when she was a child, so she remained speaking as a child. And so it's a wonderful movie where you're kind of like, okay, then I have to go back to just confirm, are my thoughts real or not? Did I see something there? Did I not see something there? And he like Sean like Baker has this ability of humanizing people that like you can't help but want them to do better while also just being like, but girl, you know better. Like
Yeah, because she's like a very intelligent person,
yeah.
but she's also a very desperate person
Yes.
who desperately she's getting tired of this life
Yes.
because she is constantly like grinding.
Yeah, and it's like this moment where you don't know like if it's supposed to be when she hits this age that she's accumulated enough money where she could stop.
Or also aging out of the profession. At
Yeah.
a certain point, they might go, well, you're a little too old to be dancing at this club, kind of a
Yeah.
thing, and that creates massive financial problems.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so your number one film was Totem,
Yes.
which we talked about. My number one film was The Zone of Interest, written and directed by Jonathan Glazer. In 1943, the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, and his wife Hedwig strive to build a dream life for their family in a house right next to the concentration and extermination camp he helped create. I have been a big fan of Jonathan Glazer ever since I saw his second film, Birth. And then I went back and watched Sexy Beast.
Hmm.
Have you seen Birth? Nicole
No,
Kidman?
I've not seen that.
Okay. But you've seen Sexy Beast.
Yes, I have.
And then you saw his follow-up to Birth, which is Under the Skin.
Yes.
Uh, and then he took over a decade, or I think it was a decade, because I think Under the Skin was 2014. And so this movie came out, I think it came out in the States last year, but then it became available to us in 2024. Uh, he, the strongest element in this film is the sound design
Mm-hmm.
because it builds over time. And the perspective of the film is purely on the Haas family. We never see a second inside the camps, but we hear the camps. And over time, the camps get louder. And this sort of the furnaces that are burning become this sort of engine of hell that's just constantly churning and moving in the background. And it is something that doesn't remain in the background. It's something that characters in scenes suddenly start to notice. There's a moment where Hedwig's mother comes to visit,
Yeah.
and she's trying to go to sleep that night in the guest bedroom, and the sky is glowing red, and all she can hear is just that chunk of the furnaces burning and
Yeah.
burning. And then eventually you can just hear masses of like voices. It sounds like hell outside. And the family keeps trying to find ways to ignore that this is happening.
Yeah.
They'll be in their backyard planting a garden, but in the meantime, you can hear things in the background while they're having conversations and no one's acknowledging. But like I said, the further you get into the movie, the more their faces start to give away what's really going on, that they are hearing it.
Yeah.
They're just trying to pretend. They get deliveries of clothing and jewelry that have been taken off of uh, people in the camps who you have to assume have been like killed at this point.
Yeah.
So there's a scene where she's, trying on fur coats in front of a mirror while these sounds are
While
playing.
giving away underwear to like some of the staff,
Yeah.
and only realize, oh well, some of the staff doesn't get it because they themselves are Jewish.
Uh, it's a film where I wouldn't even say it's character centric. And it's not plot centric either. It is pure theme.
Yeah.
It's a film about how much can people ignore? How much atrocity can people ignore? How much atrocity can people directly participate in before they crack? And Glazer's terrifying opinion that he comes to the end is they can kind of endure almost anything, right? Like
Yeah.
as long as you're providing people with their basic needs, you can get them to kind of kill anyone you need them to.
Or it's also giving them this beautiful house because
Well, she talks about her dream house.
Yeah,
And you
and,
realize
like-
your dream house in Auschwitz? Like,
yeah,
what the
or it's
fuck?
also, like the fact that when the husband is offered another position and she's just like, but I love it here.
Yeah, and then you're hearing these sounds in the background. Uh, Near the end of the film, one of the last things is he gets transferred from Auschwitz. She's allowed to stay in the house. And so he's in Poland, and I think he's going to be overseeing Dachau or something like that. It's just another one of the camps. And he attends some dinner party, and he writes to her. And one of the things he says to her is that he spent the whole party up on this balcony looking down at all the guests and trying to calculate what would be the best way to gas them all to death. And he doesn't outwardly say it, but the implication there is he's realized that participating in this genocide is doing something to him. It is destroying his humanity.
Yeah.
Because he's not looking at people anymore. He's looking at like objects to be destroyed. And his entire brain is centered around the destruction of life. And the last time we see him is he's sort of descending this staircase in his office. The way Glazer frames it, it's like he's descending into hell. That like this is a man for whom there is no peace. Like there is no humanity in him anymore. He is devoid of all of that. He is a walking demon, essentially. And so is his wife. And it's one of those films that I think not enough people will see it, and even the people who see it may not get it. But it's clear to me that what Glazer is doing here is he's reflecting on what he sees contemporaneously.
Yeah.
About the way he is seeing all of the good Germans in the Western world turn their backs and figure out convenient ways to ignore the atrocities happening around them, which they've done since birth, essentially. When you think about all of Western civilization is built on the backs of marginalized people who had labor extracted from them to the point of death. And that what happened in Germany, we've put so much focus on that one event, and it deserves focus. But at the same time, it wasn't some sort of human anomaly. It was part of a continuum of genocide
Yeah.
that's been going on for centuries, if not longer, and that we kind of have to look. It's a film about looking into the void, where like you as the audience member, he is asking you to stare into the same void as them, and then ask yourself, do you feel that this is acceptable, that we allow people to participate in these systems, or do you think that it's abhorrent, like it's monstrous? And I think he does an excellent job. It reminded me a lot of Tar,
Yeah.
another film that's about a deplorable main character where sound design is like a key element of that movie, that if you strip that sound design out, the movie doesn't work. And that's something I'll say kind of as a conclusion note. One of the things that I've really loved about this last 5-year chunk from 2020 to now, we're coming to the end of 2024, the sort of 5 years of COVID,
Yeah.
is one thing that I do think that's been a positive out of this is my ability to appreciate films has grown because I'm able to see them through so many different lenses, like technical lenses, thematically, through performance, through writing. And it's not something that I'm special because I can do it. It's simply me realizing, oh, I've really devoted and put in the time and study
Yeah.
to be able to appreciate cinema on a level like this. And it also, like, there's plenty of movies I don't like, right? But I like the idea that I can now articulate what it is I don't like about a film in a way that I feel is fairly subjective. And if I can't, I'm also able to go, oh, it's just not for me. Like, I understand that. There's just some movies that are not for me. Now, this was a movie I think you fell asleep during. Is this correct?
I think when he was like using one of the Jewish people as like the fuck.
Okay, when he was raping a
Yeah.
Jewish inmate. Did you fall asleep out of like a trauma response? You were just like, nope.
Could have been.
But yeah, it's an intense movie. It's not an easy movie to work through. The opening, like music, would say perfectly sets the mood of the film. You hear that stuff, you know what you're in for. So those were our favorite films of 2024.
Yeah.
There are still some movies that came out this year that we won't be able to watch until 2025. They'll probably end up on that list. I can imagine Nosferatu or Brady Corbett's The Brutalist.
Yeah.
But we will be back next week. Our regular film review structure that we do. We'll be talking about Kyle Mooney's latest film, Y2K, which I'm interested to see because I've liked what Kyle Mooney's done so far.
Yeah.
There's things about this trailer that I'm kind of, I don't know. And then the other movie we're going to be reviewing, which I will be very interested to hear your thoughts on, will be Wicked Part 1, which is a film that I don't, and like musicals, neither of us really has much investment in. So it's not going to be a lovey-dovey review. You're going to get a very like objective review. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching, and have a happy new year. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com patreon.com/free music.